Hello and welcome back to the Level Up English podcast, the best place to come to practice the English language, learn about the British accent and culture with me, your host, Michael Lavers. I'm coming at you today from a hot and actually somewhat cloudy Bangkok. And yeah, it's a nice day here. Hopefully I'll be able to get out later on when it cools down a bit and enjoy the day. But for today, I'm very excited. Maybe you can tell I'm very excited for today's episode because this is a topic I really love and I'm really happy that I found a way to tie it in with the podcast. So this is something that I'm interested in outside of this English learning podcast as well. And this is something called cognitive bias, or the plural would be cognitive biases, I believe is how you pronounce it. And I will be mentioning a few phrases today that sound very advanced, and that's because they kind of are. These are like psychological things about the human mind, right? So they're related to the human mind. And I think I will just tell you, if it's not super useful, I'll just let you know, like, here is the name, but don't worry about it too much. But basically, in this episode, I'm going to be talking about some ways in which our brains trick us into certain things, maybe into believing something that isn't true or something like that. And I think one really cool thing about this topic is the more you learn about it, the more you understand your own brain. And maybe you can even outsmart your brain. It's kind of a weird idea, isn't it? A weird topic that we're basically talking about the brain outsmarting the brain. It's kind of strange, isn't it? How we are a brain. You could say, I am a brain. That's what I'm using to think right now. And yet it's still so mysterious to us. There's still so much we don't know about the brain. Very strange. But anyway, before I ramble too much, I would like to remind people about my email community. This is something I don't mention as much as I should, perhaps. But if you want to join thousands of other people who sign up for free mini lessons, you can join the email community. This is available on the website. There's also a button in your podcast player that will take you right there that says something like get free lessons. And that's because if you sign up, you will get 5 free lessons from Level Up English sent to your email address. So you can enjoy those free lessons there. Then if you decide to stay signed up to the community, you will receive, how often is it? It's twice a month on a Thursday. So basically once every fortnight. Fortnight is 14 nights, 2 weeks. Once a fortnight, I send one email with a mini lesson. Usually we're learning some vocabulary, some grammar, or something like that. But I also send a quick update. So anything that I'm working on recently or my plans for the next few weeks, I will write about it in this email. So it's a nice way to stay in touch with me and learn about what's going on, as well as getting some free content in return. So once again, if you want to sign up, you can go to the website and go right to the bottom. There's a sign up button there, or there should be a link in your podcast player's description as well. Thank you for listening to that. Hopefully I can see you there on the email community. Thank you if you are signed up already. I think I'll get right into it today. I have a few different ones to talk about today, and I had to narrow the list down quite a lot because there's so many of these. So cognitive biases. The first one I want to talk about is one that some of you may have heard of, and this is known as the sunk cost fallacy. Fallacy is something that isn't true, basically. It's something that isn't true. So the sunk cost fallacy. I think I will explain what each one means before giving some examples of each one and maybe talk about my own experience with them as well, or maybe how it can relate to you. I'll also talk about some vocabulary that may be relevant because sunk cost could be a useful phrase. But basically, the sunk cost fallacy is when people continue giving their time or their money or their effort into doing something just because they have already spent so much into it. They've already invested a lot into it. And often this is even when it's no longer a good idea, right? I think an example will help illustrate this the best, to kind of describe this the best. So I find this is really true with me. Well, I've experienced this before when it comes to learning languages. Learning a language is a really difficult thing, and it takes many years to get even a little bit good at a language for most people. And maybe for me, even longer, many, many years for me. And once you've put in so many years of work, it's really difficult to stop learning, right? But you kind of have to think, am I going to be learning this language forever? You know, all of you right now who are learning English, you have to ask yourself that question. Do I want to be learning English forever? Maybe a lot of you will be yes, and if so, that's fantastic. I think having that lifelong mindset, that learning mindset, is very healthy rather than just wanting to finish learning in the short term. But for some people, maybe you have a goal to, I'm going to learn English until my trip to England, and then I'm going to stop. There might be some people out there like that, and I think it's much more common with other languages besides English. So I have done that before. I have learnt little bits of many languages, such as French, Spanish, German, Bosnian, Croatian, all these like random languages. I had a little bit of Russian in there as well. I've learnt many little languages, and these are usually in preparation for trips I have coming up or travel, right? But my goal is always to stop learning them after the trip. Because I think if I continued learning Croatian, it wouldn't be very useful. It would take so much of my time, and I rarely meet anyone from Croatia, so it wouldn't be a very useful language for me, unless I want to keep going back there. But the sunk cost fallacy says that, I've already spent 1 year learning this language. It really would be a shame to stop now, because that kind of means my whole year of progress is forgotten. So we kind of want to keep continuing something, even though it doesn't really make sense anymore. I really had this problem with Cantonese as well. I learnt Cantonese for about 2 years, and I felt like I was getting the hang of it. It was getting easier. And then I had this decision, like, should I continue with Cantonese or should I actually learn Mandarin instead? These two Chinese languages. And for whatever reason, at the time, I decided to switch to Mandarin. I think the main reason was because it's just more useful, and I had the goal of going back to Cantonese when my Mandarin is a higher level. That was my goal. Still waiting for that to happen. But that was really difficult because I did feel like all of that time I invested into Cantonese was kind of just a waste of time. And that is the sunk cost fallacy. However, I would say, if I'm thinking more carefully, it was not a waste of time because I had a really fun time learning. We say it's about the journey, not the destination. The learning process was fun for me. And, maybe there were some other benefits. Like maybe I made some friends along the way. Maybe I still remember some phrases today. Maybe I learnt a little bit about language learning itself that I can take with me into my next languages. So it's just interesting to think about. I'll give you another example of the sunk cost fallacy. I guess it's very common in like a business or a project you're working on. If the business is failing, you feel like you need to keep continuing with it just because you've already spent so much money on it before. So it would be a shame to give up now, even though it might be the best idea. It could also happen in relationships where you've been with your partner for many, many years, and for whatever reason, it's just not working. You don't love them anymore. You don't feel the same way that you used to. But you kind of feel like, well, we've had so many memories together. It's been so long. I've invested all this time into this relationship, And it would be a shame if I were just to stop it now and start again, right? This is something that many of us can relate to, I'm sure, in different areas. And I think just being aware of this fallacy, aware of this idea of a sunk cost, can help us overcome it and maybe consider, maybe it is a good idea to give up and move on from all this effort. So it is, I suppose, a good question. Like, do you think this sunk cost fallacy is actually useful? Because sometimes, of course, it's nice to keep a skill. If we want to keep these things that we've invested, it can be a good thing. But I guess the main thing is to consider if it really benefits you. And don't just continue doing something because of the sunk costs on their own. I think that's the outcome here, the moral of this idea. But I guess the expression we can learn in this one is to sink something, to sink into something. So we often use sunk with money. That's really common. And time as well. Money and time, two very useful things in life. But if you have wasted a lot of money on something, you can say you have sunk money into something. It's not necessarily a waste because it may give you some benefit later. I think what this means is it's sunk, it's under the water, and you cannot get this money back, right? That's what that word sunk means in this context. So I felt this a lot in the early days of Level Up English. I don't even know how much money I sunk into the website and the business, but it's probably quite a lot. And at the beginning, it just wasn't really working. I had no members, no one was interested. Even in the podcast, no one was too interested. So I sunk a lot of money trying to make it popular. And I had the choice there to either give up and lose all that investment or keep going. So hopefully I made the right choice to keep going in that case. But maybe you can let me know an area in which where you have sunk a lot of money or time into a project or something similar. Okay, so that's a sunk cost fallacy. I think sunk could be a useful one. It's a sunk cost. It's a cost I cannot get back. This next one is a bit different, but it's another bias. Maybe I can mention this now, by the way. A bias, B-I-A-S, is when you have a tendency to lean towards a particular view, perspective, or idea in a kind of unfair way. Maybe you have some reason why you cannot be fair in that situation. So I might say, oh yes, the British accent is the best accent in the world. But of course, I have some bias because I am from Britain. So I have some bias, right? So a bias is having like an unfair leaning towards some view in your mind. So that's what that word means. Anyway, the next bias here is loss aversion. Loss aversion. Loss is the noun of lose, to lose something. Aversion is kind of like avoiding something, trying to stay away from something. So you want to stay away from losing something. Loss aversion. Could be useful, could be useful. So this is someone's tendency to prefer avoiding losses. So you want to avoid losing something rather than gaining something. So again, I think an example will be useful. I could say to you, you have to spend £50 and there's a really high chance, like 80% chance that you will get £100 in return. This is your investment. It's your gamble. It's like maybe you're at the casino. So if you spend £50, there's a high chance you will get £100 and double your money. But there's also a small chance you will lose everything. You will lose your £50. And this is a really hard choice for many people because even though there's a good chance you will gain money, the fear of losing money is stronger for most people than the desire to gain money, right? And this basically is because in the human mind, negative feels much worse than positives feel good. I think it's, how humans have survived over the millennia, right? And that's because we have avoided dangerous and scary things. So it's kind of in our DNA, it's in our bodies to avoid bad things. Another example of this is if you think of the worst pain you've ever had and the best feeling you've ever had, maybe a really strong, pleasurable feeling of happiness. And if someone said to you, do you want 1 minute of the worst pain followed by 1 minute of the best feeling ever, would you take that deal? Or would you just stay the same and be like you are now? There might be some of you who would take that deal, but I think most of us would not take that deal because, again, the bad feels much worse than the good feels good. Hopefully that makes sense. So we want to avoid losing something. We want to avoid negatives as much as we can. I also think this is why many people stay in comfortable positions without risking something more. This is something you see all over the world, and we all do it in some way. And maybe it's relatable for you or someone you know, right? Where maybe you have a job or a situation, a friendship maybe, where it's kind of okay, you're comfortable, it's nice, it's not bad, but it could be better. You're kind of thinking, maybe it could be a bit more, it could be a bit better than this. However, you're scared to try to go to that next level because it's a risk, right? It's a risk. And it could get much, much better if you take that risk, or it could get much, much worse. So because there's that worse possibility, you think it's safer to stay where you are and stay comfortable. Such a common thing with people. I'm not saying it's right or wrong to make either choice, but again, just being aware of this bias will help you make a more informed decision. I think that's really important. Again, for each of these biases, I'm going to try to relate it to my own life to make it a bit more interesting, but I'll see if I can also relate it to language learning or English learning as well. So just to get a bit open with you, a bit personal, that this is something that I feel quite a lot when it comes to the Level Up English empire. No, I'm just kidding. Let's call it the business, right? The Level Up English business. I always have big ideas for how to hopefully improve it in the future and make it better. And it's always very scary to do that because, once again, it may make it better, but also it may make it worse. So right now, I have some people who are supporting me and some people like you who are listening or watching. And that's good. I'm quite happy with that. If I make a change, a big change, I may get more, but I could also lose everyone. Maybe all of you will hate me and stop listening. And that is much, much scarier than the positives that could come out of it. So every change you make in a business is a risk, and that can be really scary for many people. So I think it's very relatable, this idea, right, that I would rather stay the same than risk making something worse. That's what we're talking about. But I think it's also interesting how when I reflect on the past, when I think back to the past, almost all the changes I have made have been good. People have been happier. It's been a positive change. So once you're aware of that, you can maybe learn and reflect a bit more logically and hopefully act in a way that is wiser, more wise, right? And I suppose another kind of loss is the feeling of making a mistake when speaking a language. I feel like this is kind of related because the possibility of making a mistake when you're talking in English can be very scary, and it can lead many people to not even want to try to do something new. And I always try to encourage people on the website, try to use very difficult language and advanced structures in your writing or speaking, because the more mistakes you make, the faster you will learn. But again, I think people, including myself, it's so much easier to say, I would rather just be comfortable at my level than risk embarrassing myself and making a mistake and trying to go to that next level. So that's something that we have to overcome, if we do feel that way, right? So anyway, that is loss aversion. I may have to make this episode shorter and maybe do a part 2 in the future because I'm rambling a bit more than I expected, but again, that's because I enjoy this topic and I hope you do as well. The next one is actually a very popular one, so you may have heard of this one. This is called confirmation bias. Confirmation bias. And this is something I know you have done. I know everyone's done this, right? This is the tendency to search for information that confirms your own opinions or confirms your own beliefs. A really, really good and kind of funny example of this is when you want to research something to see if you are correct, say on Google. The way you search it is an example of confirmation bias. Let's say that I think... Here's a random example. So it's a common stereotype that British people have really bad teeth, right? I'm not sure it's true. I don't think it's that true. I think, how are my teeth? I think they're fine. But it's a common stereotype that especially Americans will kind of poke fun at the British people, make fun of us and say, why are your teeth so disgusting? Why are their teeth always really bad? And maybe I want to prove them wrong by researching which country has the worst teeth. If I want to kind of research in an unbiased way, I might research like that, like countries that have the worst teeth or the worst, dentist, something like that. I don't know. However, I don't want to be wrong, so I'm going to research why British people have good teeth, or actually, British people have good teeth. I'm going to research something like that. So the results I find online will hopefully be confirming what I already believe. Right. So this is a big problem on the internet where the wording you use can just confirm your own beliefs and you never really see beliefs that are different from you. It's kind of a big problem. We also call these bubbles on the internet. You might be in your bubble or your echo chamber. That's another similar word, where basically you're in this community online or in real life where everyone around you is saying the same thing. So you never hear a different idea. So therefore you really more strongly believe over time that your opinion is the correct one. And again, I just think the internet makes this problem, this bias, so much more prevalent, so much worse, so much stronger, because it is easy to find information that agrees with what you think. It's very common in politics as well. If you have a political view, you will look for news sources from websites that agree with your political view. Let's say if you're really right-wing, a right-wing political stance, it's less likely that you will find information on a left-wing news website, right? So you'll probably want to read only your own opinions. It's more fun, it's more comfortable to read that. And this also comes up in friendships as well, perhaps, where you may only like people who have the same opinions as you, because opposing beliefs, that means opposite beliefs, make you uncomfortable, right? So you're kind of confirming your own beliefs by choosing the friends that you spend time with. And again, it's not to say that's always wrong. It's nice to be around people who are not always disagreeing with you, of course. But I think it is good to be aware of this still, to be aware of your confirmation bias. And if nothing else, you can just have some awareness that your opinion is not always correct. What are the chances that you are correct on everything? I think pretty much zero. Like, I have a lot of opinions, but I don't think there's any chance that I am correct on all of them. So I think that's a really nice way to view something, that, okay, I may be wrong, but this is what I believe at the moment. So that's one really big bias that we might have. Maybe we have time for two more. I did have a longer list, but unfortunately, I forgot how much I like to ramble. But I hope you're enjoying this anyway. I hope this is interesting for you. You'll have to let me know too if you knew about any of these before, or how many of these are new for you today. That would be interesting. Okay, the next one is known as the framing effect. Framing effect. So to frame is like you might frame a picture, which is where you put something around a photo. We call it a photo frame, a picture frame. It's usually like a I guess it can look like it's metal or wood. I guess the material depends. It could be plastic. But it's something that goes around a picture to make the picture look nicer, to display on your wall. That's a frame. And yeah, a frame just kind of, it changes how you view something based on the context, I suppose. So the framing effect is decisions that are influenced by the way information is shown or presented, rather than the information itself. I have a really good example of this from my own experience, but I'll give you hopefully a clear one to start with, an example. So let's say you were choosing some medical treatment that was maybe going to change your life, some really nice medical treatment to improve your health. And it said 90% survival rate. Okay, that sounds pretty good. 90% of people will survive. Oh, not bad. That sounds quite nice. But then you look at a different one that says 10% mortality rate. Mortality rate means how many people die. Mortality is your life, so how many people will die. And that's quite scary. 10% of people will die? That's 10 in 100? That's really scary. Wow, I'm not going to do that. Are you crazy? But of course it's the same thing, right? 90% survival, 10% dying, it's the same. It's just the framing makes it sound different. So if you focus on the positive, it sounds more positive. That's basically what that means. Another example is in products and marketing and advertising. It's so common in marketing. And once you know about this framing effect, this bias, you will see it everywhere. And you might be less likely to be tricked into buying something. I made up an example here that maybe you won't quite see this, but something similar to this. You might have one product with two different packages. One package, again, it says 10% sugar. And you might think, oh, that's a lot of sugar. I don't know about that. 10% sugar? That's huge. But then you look at another package that says 90% natural ingredients. Oh, okay, that sounds really good. That 10%, yeah, it doesn't matter. It's nothing, right? Even though it's the same. So, yeah, I think framing is very, very big in marketing. I will tell you my own experience now. So, basically, if you're a foreigner in Thailand, even if you live in Thailand for a long time, you'll always be treated as a foreigner here. I think that's just a common thing in Asia in general. And it's not a nice feeling all the time. And one thing you might find is even if you have a work permit in Thailand, you may still have to pay a foreigner price because of where you were born. Even maybe your skin color could come into effect in some cases. So sometimes it feels a little bit uncomfortable when me and a Thai friend, we're going to the same place. They get to pay a very, very small entrance fee. And because I'm a foreigner, I have to pay much, much more. And there are good reasons for that. You might say, okay, foreigners don't pay tax like Thai people do, so that could be why. But sometimes even the foreigners who do pay taxes still have to pay the higher fee to go into like a temple, for example. So yeah, it doesn't feel that nice, and it's like we're being charged more because we are foreigners. So that's not a good framing right there. However, here's the opposite. I also went to China earlier in the year, and I went to a national park where I had to pay an entrance fee, and it said, this is the fee to enter the park. And then it had another bit underneath that said, locals can enter for free, right? It's a discount for people who live in the area. Essentially, this is the same thing, right? If you're not from there, you pay more. If you're from there, you pay less. But the framing is different. So in Thailand, foreigners pay higher than the entrance fee. In China, they're kind of saying, okay, foreigners pay the normal fee. If you're local, you get a discount. So the discount is good. A higher fee is bad. So the framing is very important. And the Chinese framing in this case was much nicer. It sounded much nicer to me. So Hopefully that makes sense. And if you are working for the government or tourist agency, then maybe you could take this into consideration so you don't get so many angry foreigners about the price. Trying to kind of attach this one to language learning, I couldn't really think of a great example, but again, it's so common when you're buying something, you're paying for something. So maybe if you're looking for a language course, try to focus on the success rate of the course or the exam or the reviews of the course. Because again, if someone says 95% of students pass this course, that sounds really great. Wow, 95%, that's fantastic. But imagine if it said 5% of students will fail. It sounds a lot worse, right? 5% will fail. So just that framing is so important. I think it's a good metaphor or good analogy for life as well. How you frame something changes your perspective. You could frame the rain as being depressing and sad and cold, or you can frame it as refreshing and helping the plants grow and beautiful and relaxing. There's two different ways to frame one event, which is a great way to approach life. Let's do one final one now. This is known as cognitive dissonance. I will probably just say for this one, it's not super important. That word dissonance, it's not really that common of a word. We don't really need to learn it, so don't worry about that one. Cognitive, it's not super useful, but basically it's related to the mind, the brain. Your cognitive power is your brain power. So cognitive dissonance is the name. But to try and make it a bit simpler, this means the brain, mental discomfort that you might experience when you have two contradictory beliefs or values. Contradictory means you might have two beliefs that don't go together. They don't match together. They contradict, right? They cannot go together. So what really commonly happens is when you try to talk yourself into believing something to avoid accepting your cognitive dissonance. So for example, you might buy something really, really expensive. Let's say you buy a really nice new iPhone. But then the next day, you see an iPhone for sale on another website that's much, much cheaper. And you might think like, oh no, I wasted so much money on that iPhone. I spent so much more money. If I waited one more day, I could have saved a lot of money. If you are experiencing cognitive dissonance, you might say something like, well, because I got it earlier, I got some more features. I think my phone, this one's better than that phone. Actually, that discounted phone is probably not very good. Maybe it's not even a new phone. Maybe they did something to it. It's actually broken and they're trying to resell it, right? So can you see here that I'm trying to make up some reasons as to why my decision was the best decision? So rather than admitting that I made a mistake, I'm trying to come up with some reason to help me feel better about it. Right? So that's one example. Another really common one that I see all the time is with eating meat. Many of you will know that I do not eat meat, so I think I'm maybe more aware of this. I feel like if you don't eat meat, you see this more and more. It becomes more obvious. But you might see someone, for example, holding a hamburger, like a beef burger or something, eating a cow, literally, and they're going, oh, I love animals. I would never hurt animals, eating their burger. And it's kind of like, well, there's some cognitive dissonance there because it's likely that that person hasn't attached, what they're eating to the animal that they are saying they love, right? And I think the cognitive dissonance here comes because there's distance from what they are purchasing and the action of killing the cow, right? So there's a separation there. So that is a very common example of cognitive dissonance. What they're saying and what they are doing does not match up. So therefore, it's cognitive dissonance, right? They're trying to talk themselves into believing what they're doing is correct. But that's just the two examples that I could think of for this one. If you can think of any more for this one or for any of them, please let me know. I always love hearing your opinions and seeing your comments. It's always one of my favourite parts of doing the podcast, so please let me know. I think I'll do something today that we haven't done in a little while, and this is read some comments from Spotify. And I've actually noticed that since I've been reading them, the comments have got a bit longer. So I think some of you have realised that I read them on the podcast and you want to actually make them more interesting. So thank you. On episode 277, we have a comment from Luis Fernando, who says, the best interview ever. Wow, that's so nice. Thank you. That's really nice. Another one on that episode from MSMM, who said, I really enjoyed the episode. I like the fact that it is discussing something we all want to learn, despite our level in English. Thank you, Sama from Saudi Arabia. Thank you both very much for those comments on that episode. Danny said on episode 275, awesome episode, Michael. Nice simple comment, but thank you very much, Danny. Appreciate that you liked that one. On episode 274, finally, it had a few comments from Mohammed, who said, absolutely beneficial episode that gave us much confidence to complete our journey to learn. That's great to hear. Hanan said, wonderful episode. Thank you. Jude said, age is never a reason to learn new things, especially learning English. I think maybe you mean age is never a reason not to learn new things. Maybe that makes more sense, but yeah, I get what you mean. Thank you very much, Jude. And finally, Nicholas says, thank you, Michael. It's always a pleasure to listen to your podcast. And likewise, it's always a pleasure to read your comments. So thank you so much. Really appreciate them all. You're welcome to leave a comment on Spotify or a review on Apple Podcast, and I will read them eventually. Thank you for that. Let's just end with a little quote now. It's a nice quote, and I don't believe this has an author, but it's a very common saying, which is, it's not what you say, but how you say it. So this is kind of related to the framing effect, right? It's not what you say, but how you say it, right? And I think that just says the tone of your voice is so important in language, and giving people compliments or insults, it's really important. And when you're learning English, please don't forget about this. It's really, really common in probably all languages, but especially in English, when the way that you say something will affect the meaning and how other people will see it, right? So always remember that and try to develop your pronunciation naturally to use this kind of tone, right? Anyway, I'll leave it there now. I am starting to get a bit hot, so I'm going to stop recording and turn the aircon back on. Thank you so much for watching or listening. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye. You have been listening to the Level Up English podcast. If you would like to leave a question to be answered on a future episode, then please go to levelupenglish.school/podcast. That's levelupenglish.school/podcast. And I'll answer your question on a future episode. Thanks for listening.